Welcome to the Synchronicity Show. My guest today is my man, Shy Sayar. Yoga therapist Shy Sayar is the founder and director of studies at Tantravaya Yoga, a global Ayurvedic yoga academy specializing in anatomy-based alignment technique, realignment therapy, and non-dual philosophy. Shy was born and raised in Israel, did his doctoral studies at UC Berkeley, and now lives in, as I just found out, Tenerife in the Canary Islands off the coast of Spain. He directs yoga teacher trainings and therapist certification programs, including a 200 to 500-hour training online starting next month on the 1st of September 2021, which we are going to talk quite a bit about today. All of the relevant links that we will talk about will be available at kevinwathey.com/podcast. But without much further ado, my man, Shy, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy. I'm happy to see you. I'm happy to be where I am. It's a good life right now. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. As we spoke, I'm wrapping up a 6-week stint down in Costa Rica right now, and I have 2 days left. So I'm soaking up every final moment of the beautiful weather before I go back to the hot box that is Arizona right now.
Wow. Could be a lot worse for both of us. We should probably take a moment of silence to acknowledge our privilege. But other than that, I think
agree.
We're doing pretty well.
I agree. Let's take a breath together for this one.
Sounds good.
I love that.
Yeah, jokes aside, sincere compassion for all the people around the world who are suffering so much still. Just from everything humans suffer from, and also from everything we've had to go through this last year. I'm super grateful to be where I am, super happy you're in a good place too.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate the recognition and starting the podcast or the episode on that foot. And something that I also want to do, and normally I'll kind of dive straight into questions and see what comes up. But rather than diving into questions, and I know that you're always learning, researching, diving into something new, what is at the forefront of your mind right now? What is the passion project? What lights you up right now?
The planet. The planet. Yeah, I actually am just finishing up buying a very, very large plot of land. In fact, a small mountain here on the island for a reforestation and permaculture project. It's large enough that I think by reforesting it with the kind of trees that were taken from the Canary Islands to mainland Europe in the last centuries, we can actually change the climate of the island, which is unbelievable, let alone what we can do for habitat and biodiversity and growing food. We also have lots of refugees coming from Africa to the Canary Islands all the time. We're actually in Spain politically, but we're off the coast of southern Morocco, almost the southern edge of Morocco, so really far down in what is, reasonably speaking, geographically Africa. So we have a lot of refugees coming in, and I dream about doing all kinds of food sustainability, wellness programs for any of them that are interested in participating and learning from all the wisdom that they're bringing to us here.
What was the initial impulse to buy the plot of land? What kind of led you to make that decision of that's where you wanted to focus your efforts?
That's a good question that I can answer in a short, medium, or long way. I'll try short, but with a little bit of a little bit of background, which is that I've been thinking about doing something like this for it's almost embarrassing. Probably a decade and a half, if not two. It started when I was a fairly young yoga teacher, and I began my first business, which was actually taking people on yoga retreats, but on a completely shoestring way. Most of my students were university students at UC Berkeley at the time. And I just started taking us all on camping retreats where everybody would arrange rides and bring food to cook together and share. And in fact, I did many of them completely by donation. And to my own surprise, ended up making a really, really good living just from the appreciation of people for the quality of education they were receiving. While for me, it was going camping and doing yoga and meditation with my favorite people, which I would do for free anyway. So it was really nice. And after our community started growing and growing, I was doing multiple retreats, sometimes more than one a month. We did a long spring break one. And I just started thinking, we should live like this. We should, this should not be a break from life. I'd like this to be life, living in nature, in community, growing our own food, generating sustainable power, devoting our lives to the practices of the mind and the body and happiness. And I've been very slowly and moderately looking for the right place in the world to do that. I've explored Australia and New Zealand. I've explored Hawaii, where we met, where I lived for a while. But only when I came here, I felt finally like I have no reservation. This is it. This is the place.
I love the fact that you bring up this should not be a break from life, because I feel like a lot of the time we go on vacations, we move to different places, we travel around, and we're always like running from something or searching for something else because we think that our life can't be all that we want it to be. Yeah. You have a very distinct mindset, or a different mindset than a lot of even yoga instructors and people that I have met, where it's, oh yeah, that's great, but it can't always be that way. Where does that difference in mindset or that shift come from, and why do you feel that? And I'm not saying it's wrong, because I agree with you as well, that it can be everything you want it to be. So where does that difference in mindset come from?
Yeah, two places really. One, and that's the simpler answers, from my teachers. I've had so many great teachers, including Pema Chodron, who's probably the most important teacher of my life. And also in the posthumously, because I never got to meet him while alive, but doing the Vipassana 10-day retreats with Satnarayan Goenka. They both, and others of my great teachers, like Rupert Spira, for example, that I got to sit with a few times around the world, say that the idea that the mind has that it needs a break from meditation is false. In fact, meditation is like a break from the suffering of illusion. So when we think, oh, let's live this life and occasionally take a break to like refuel with these mind-body practices, look, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's also not necessary. There's nothing wrong with living. I mean, I work for a living, I earn money, I buy resources, I share resources, I participate in life. I have a partner, I'm sexually active, I eat mostly vegan, but not entirely. I do believe in not making anything in life wrong. But at the same time, and this maybe leads to the second place where this comes from for me, I come from a very, very challenging and difficult childhood. I grew up in Israel, and there was violence on every level. There was violence on the international level, of course, much worse for the Palestinians and in the Palestinian territories than for us, but still painful, scary, got to see a lot of death, a lot of blood, a lot of violence. There was violence on the streets and at school, which I really tried to avoid but couldn't always. And there was even violence in the home for me. And I am grateful to it today, after many years of both yoga, meditation, therapy, and all kinds of practices and help from others and teachers. I'm really grateful for that, because it set me on a path to try to understand happiness and to try to understand what a human being needs to do in order to be happy. And one of the main things I've learned over all these years is that there is no one size fits all, and that there is no right and there is no wrong, that what can be healing and medicine for one person can be the wrong path or poison for another, or even for the same person at different times. But in the same line, it also made it clear to me that there is no necessary standard way to live. It's not necessary to have a job. It's not necessary to live in the first world. It's all these things. I guess being also an expat, leaving my country at some point and traveling the world has been very challenging, very painful, very scary, very lonely at times. At the same time, completely horizon opening. So I've developed an attitude of everything is possible, everywhere is accessible, and every way of life is legitimate.
It's as if you're always finding a solution rather than looking for the problem in what comes up.
Well, yeah, I try my best. I get stuck in problem thinking all the time, like everybody. But again, through the grace of my teachers and the great privilege of having had practice for so many years, I also find myself in the state of no problem, which is actually one of my definitions for meditation. Meditation is not the state of no thinking. It's not the state of no suffering, even, or no pain, let's say. But it can be a state of no suffering just by virtue of being the state of no problem. In other words, thoughts, no problem. My leg fell asleep, no problem. Kind of a no big deal attitude. And I'm not so good at it yet in life, like in a relationship conflict, or when suddenly a lot of money is in danger of being lost. Like everybody else, my heartbeat speeds up and I can lose sleep over it. But I'm grateful to say, sooner and sooner, every year, every decade, I remember, oh God, that's none of it is where happiness comes from. And the solution really is this attitude of no problem, of no big deal, of life continues.
You spoke just a second ago briefly on violence and growing up in that culture or having to work through that as you began to grow up. What did that do in order to prepare you uniquely for where you are today?
Hmm. I think in addition to what I already mentioned, that it set me on this incessant, burning desire kind of path to understand healing, to understand happiness for myself, and eventually, hopefully, to have something of value to share with others. I think what it comes down to is gratitude. A few years ago, I got to volunteer at a refugee camp called Maheba in Zambia. And I remember having this conversation with one of the people there where I asked, how's the day? Which was kind of the common way of saying hello. And he said, the day is fine, except for the suffering. And I asked, and what do you mean by the suffering? And he said, the hunger. But at the same time, if you offer somebody there a meal when they've already eaten, they'll just say, I've already had lunch or I've already had dinner. And that changed me profoundly, seeing the sincere happiness despite the pain that was available there. It brought me to a place of recognizing, sometimes I've thought to myself, is teaching yoga and meditation to, let's face it, predominantly privileged people, is that really making the difference I want to make in the world? And the answer is 101% hell yes. Because I think we are the people who might be suffering the most. And I may get a lot of criticism for saying this because there's, I'm not actually white, but I'm very much white passing, and I've gotten a lot of privilege thanks to that, living in the US for so many years. And yes, I recognize that if we start a competition on who's suffering more, there's a lot of debate to be made over that. But I sincerely believe from my experience that the people I've seen suffer the most in my life are the ones who are stuck in a mindset of unhappiness despite privilege. And so when it comes back to the question of violence in my childhood and all that, it brings me back to a moment on my therapist couch in Hawaii a few years back when I was speaking very eloquently, like I always get stuck in, about about my life, and she very astutely said, "Okay, can I hear now from young Shy? Can I hear now from the vulnerable Shy that doesn't have all the wisdom you've accumulated over the years, supposedly?" And I took a moment, and in that time, like not always, but I was able to step into that and really feel kind of that role playing of my young self, or that connection to my young self. And I started crying, and I heard myself say, "Why me?" And then instantly the tears stopped, and I sat up and I smiled, and I said, why me? Of course me. Because not only could I handle it, I turned it into gold. I turned it into a life of increasing happiness, again, every year, every decade, despite the difficulties, despite the challenges, despite the shortcomings. And I'd like to think increasing happiness and well-being and skill in life for others as well.
Why do you think that? First off, that's an insanely profound experience, and thank you for sharing that. But the question and the first thought that comes to mind there is, why do you think that sometimes the most privileged individuals are the ones who are hurting or struggling the most?
I think because happiness and suffering don't depend on circumstances. I think that's the biggest lie that we tell ourselves. It's the biggest misunderstanding, the biggest confusion or illusion that we live through. The idea that happiness depends on circumstances. In other words, I'm unhappy because this happened or didn't happen. I'm unhappy because I don't have this, or I will be happy when I have that. I think the story of the life of the young Buddha is precisely meant to illustrate that. You know, he was, according to the legend or the story, a young prince whose parents loved him so much that they made sure not a single leaf would fall from a tree without a servant picking it up, so that the child experienced nothing but growth, blooming, joy, happiness. He wasn't allowed to see old age. He wasn't allowed to see sickness. He wasn't allowed to see death. And yet, suffering nagged at him like it nags at all of us humans, and Buddhism would even say all of us sentient beings. And it's coming from this root confusion. Happiness depends on circumstances. And I sincerely believe that the more dependent we are on circumstances, and again, think about it, the more privileged we are, the more we tend to think, oh, let me get more, let me try to achieve more, right? As opposed to many people on the planet for whom survival is the primary directive, right? So I really think that privilege can be a fantastic opportunity, as it has been, I think, for both of us to hear the Dharma, to hear the teachings, to be exposed to this, to devote our lives to it, to have the leisure to do it. But it can also be a prison, and it can also be a detriment.
I agree with you there, and this is in no way to negate the suffering that others go through, because yes,
Yes.
I completely agree that we have lived very privileged lives. The thing that I recognize, though, is that losing my mother when I was 17
Yeah.
and having to go through what would be that traumatic experience for me actually then prepared me to be able to grow and expand as I got older. And
Yes.
I've played with the thought of, what if that didn't happen? And I grew up in this privileged life without having any, like, sheltered, like the Buddha having the leaves drop. What if I didn't have any, for you, violence or traumatic experience, and everything was perfect? And I think it's almost, the more sheltered the upbringing, the less qualified you are to handle what life throws your way.
I love you, man.
You aren't you aren't like,
Yeah.
it's, I mean, and even look at some of the best teachers as well. It's the ones who have been
Yeah.
through the most shit are often the ones who are able to not only vocalize what they're going through, but be able to have an empathetic response to another
Yes.
individual, because they can recognize and say, look, I've been there, and look where I am now. I've been able to pull myself out of this. You're able to too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think you're pointing also to the work of Gabor Mate, and it just released an amazing new documentary, right? The power of trauma, or something like that, and just the fact that our trauma is not a problem. It's that we don't have the resources and the support, many of us, to face the traumas that we face. And again, when I say there was violence in my household, I can name it. My father, who passed just over a decade ago, he was the violent presence in the house, and towards mostly the women of the household. But as I grew older, I grew to recognize where that came from for him. He was severely abused by his father. And again, do I make him the bad guy? Who knows what he went through? I don't know. I've never been able to find out. And the difference I see between me and my father when I say there by the grace of God go I, is that he grew up in a time and a place where he didn't have exposure to yoga and to the Dharma and meditation and the things I was exposed to. I believe my life could have been just as painful and horrendous as much of his was. Because again, I think the perpetrators of violence suffer much more than the victims. In the same way that, I know of a Tibetan monk that was asked after years and years of torture by the Chinese occupiers, were you ever afraid? And he said, yes, of course. And then he was asked, what were you afraid of? And he said, I'm going to cry. I was afraid that I would lose my compassion for them. That the torture could take away from me understanding who's really suffering here. So this ability to have compassion for the perpetrators of violence, and the ability to, again, come back to gratitude for the fact that we have been in a world and been exposed to teachings and understandings and opportunities and practices and healings that allow us to, I hope, you and I make the world a better place instead of leaving more harm in our path.
I don't think hope is the right word, because I think and I know that you are. And just the way that you speak and even how you approach this conversation shows that you are creating a ripple effect in the world. So I thank you for that. And I'm very interested in the why behind the what. And I want to know, growing up, what did you initially want to be when you, quote, grew up, got older?
Oh God! I think, like every kid, I went through a bunch of different options. I wanted to be a veterinarian because I loved animals so much, and I think there is, like, for many people, I think there is the root of love and compassion, because seeing these creatures that are dependent on us, right, that are less capable of taking care of themselves, I just wanted to help. And I think from there grew the desire that culminated in doing what I do in life right now. But being exposed to yoga, which I was very lucky to start as a preteen, even my first exposure in Israel, it changed the path completely. I still followed an academic path. I still thought I might be a professor at university, but life and yoga had their own ideas of where I was, I think, meant to go, and I'm really happy where I am.
When I asked for you to come on the show, you had sent me a couple different prompts, and one of them being, you have 30 years of yoga experience, but you're only 41, and you just touched on that slightly.
Yeah.
Could we double click there for a second, and could we expand upon what was the initial impulse, or what was the initial drawing force that pulled you into a yoga practice?
Yeah, it's really good. It was, bizarrely enough, running. Actually, I was the kind of kid who had a doctor's note to get me out of PE class always. I thought that I had, everybody thought that I had asthma, bronchitis. Really, it was just severe anxiety because of the trauma. But it excused me from exercise. And so by the age of 12, I had a lot of focus on my academics. I already was reading and writing in a few languages and was doing a lot of studying and research and really developing my mind, but neglecting my body tremendously, to the point where, you think of Paschimottanasana, it's sitting and folding over your legs. I had to sit back on my hands and still my legs would hurt at that age, which is sad, which is really sad. But when a few neighborhood boys started running on the beach as training for military combat units, which of course I had zero intention of joining. For whatever crazy reason, I don't know, I started running with them, and it completely changed my relationship to myself. I found out that I think running was my first meditation. I started running with them, but quickly I started running alone, and realized that I could run something like indefinitely. I would run south from my city, which was just south of Tel Aviv, and the ocean to my right, always the Mediterranean Sea, and then different cities and dunes and cities would pass to my left, and I just felt peace in a way that really I hadn't known for years up until that point. And it introduced me to my body. It changed what I wanted to eat without any theory, without any studies of nutrition or Ayurveda or all the things that I studied later in life. And then it was Qigong, of all things. I was watching an interview show, and they were interviewing an older Israeli couple that had lived in China for many years and was now back in Israel teaching Qigong. And at the end of the show, they said, you at home can stand up and do some exercises with us. And I did, and I started moving. And if on one hand you can imagine the discovery that I experienced from running of my body that I was completely disconnected with, beginning to communicate with me, imagine what it was like to feel, I didn't even know what the word meant, but chi or prana, which again, I felt undeniably, maybe all the more so because of the innocence, because nobody's ever told me about chi or prana or any of that. And I just felt that kind of joie of this joy of discovery that only a child can have, right? This like, oh my God, this is what life is about. And people have been either completely ignorant or somehow hiding this from me, right? And I became obsessed. I did Qigong, just a few exercises they showed me, every single day on the beach, before and after running, until an amazing musician. I was also a musician at the time. I guess I still am. That I grew up with told me one day that he took a yoga class in Tel Aviv. Now this is 1993 or something, like 94 by that point. I think there were like 2 yoga teachers in Tel Aviv. Now, of course, everybody and their mom are yoga teachers. Like literally everybody's mom I've met in Israel has been a yoga teacher so far, all my childhood friends. But at the time it was really rare, but I had heard of yoga. I was super fascinated with mind-body practices because of the Qigong. He showed me some exercises. I integrated them into my daily beach practice, and did that for another 4 years before I finally moved to Los Angeles and met who would be my teacher until I became a teacher.
Did you initially or always want to become a teacher? Is that the path that you wanted to go? Explain, let's dive into that.
I guess, okay, to be fair, I think I was sure for many years that I would be a teacher, because in a way that's what I've always done. Even when I was a hyper cocky young kid who skipped grades in school, and the math teacher would try to explain something, and the kid in the back would always again and again say, "I'm sorry, I just don't get it. This is an actual real life memory I have of like raising my hand and saying, "Can I try to explain it?" And the teacher looking at me like I fell from the moon. But I did. I got up to the chalkboard and wrote it a different way and explained it. And the kids say, "Oh, why didn't you say so?" And skip ahead to when I was doing my PhD at Berkeley, and my amazing dissertation chair, Hannah Korenfeld, said to me, I know you're not a bit of an admission. I know you're not the hardest worker out there. I was probably the least erudite and well-read student in my department. The people around me were so educated about everything that all the great writers in the field were writing. And she said, I know you don't work so hard, but your gift is to take information, no matter how opaque, no matter how obscure, no matter how difficult, and make it accessible to virtually everyone. So I think I always knew I would be a teacher. I always knew that was my vocation, that was my calling, that was my gift. But to imagine myself as a yoga teachers were like semi-divine creatures that walked on clouds, and I admired and adored them like gods. And then later in life, I was in that position. I realized how lonely and kind of messed up that is, and let it go to my head and did lots of stupid things and regretted them. And like I think the best of us, or at least me. Uh, no, I had no idea this would be my life and my livelihood, but I'm super grateful for it.
What was the tipping point? What was the tipping point that led you to understanding or full-heartedly knowing that this was the path that you needed to take?
Nice. I think it was a few separate points, but they had a lot in common. So I said I was practicing on my own for a few years, moved to Los Angeles, met my first teacher, who was fantastic. I used to say, Joey is a teacher by the grace of God, and I'm a teacher by the grace of Joey. But before I was a teacher and I was just Joey's student, um, I remember these moments after years, literally years, of doing, say, Virabhadrasana Eka, right, Warrior One pose, with pain in my lower back, and then one day just figuring out the inner and outer rotation of the humerus of the thigh bone rather, and the tilting of the pelvis and the activation of the deep core muscles and the pelvic floor, and the lift of the spine and the bones behind the ears and the skull. And suddenly, not only was there no pain, but there was this bliss, this joy, this flow, this energy. I had a similar experience also with, of course, the chair pose, right? Everybody hates chair pose until we understand it. Now we can sit in it for decades and it doesn't matter anymore. It was those moments that triggered my yet very young, very dormant, very naive, but compassion. It was suddenly a sense of everybody needs to understand this. Everybody needs to know this. It's not okay that people are doing asana and hurting themselves. And that's really what inspired me to become a yoga teacher. Later also Ayurveda, meditation, bodywork, all the things that I practice and teach. A sincere desire to make the path quicker and shorter for others. The fact that I've spent nearly 30 years learning what I know, my wish is for all my students to get everything I know faster so that they can surpass me and pass more to their students.
You bring up a point there that I want to touch on, which is your belief behind why you teach the way that you do. We'll get there in just a second, but sure. I want to backtrack before I glance over this, because this is something that stood out to me when I first met you when we were in Hawaii. And I was stunned at the level of specificity you could speak at, yet retain clarity in what you were saying. And like you had just said, when you were in school, writing it out on the chalkboard differently and explaining it in a different way. Is this something that you've cultivated over the years of education, or is this an innate gift that you have had since before you remember?
I feel a little self-conscious. Thank you. But I think both. I think it's something that has always been a part of me, and it's something that I also owe a debt of gratitude for to not just my formal education, but also people like my uncle Moti, my father's brother, that I in many ways grew up with as a second, sometimes almost like a first father, who I loved going to his house because every time I would get to play the piano in his house, which I didn't have in mind at first. And he would ask me riddles all the time and always challenge me and just really cultivate my intellect and my understanding. And to be fair, also my parents really encouraged that and supported a lot of education, a lot of self-study for me, a lot of books. So yeah, I owe a debt of gratitude to that as well.
Continuing down this path, then we'll backtrack in a second here. Continuing down this path, and I like that you bring this up because this is something that I wanted to talk to you about. I never have had an opportunity to. I have always lived my life by the motto, education is what is done to you, learning is what you do to yourself. Because while university was fantastic for a multitude of reasons, don't feel that it was that beneficial to me outside of the networking, partying, connection part of school, which, yes, prepared me for life in a multitude of different ways, but educationally speaking, not as much as I would have liked or expected it to. being someone who is so deeply educated and has chosen a path of teaching as well as continual education, if we want to use that word.
Yeah.
How do you feel, one, on that quote or mantra or motto? And two, let's start there. Start there with that one.
Okay.
Unpack that for me.
Nice. I like it, and I see where you're coming from. What comes up for me in that is first of all, yes, I've always been more of a self-studier than anything. But I believe that on our own, the most we can become is clever. I think it takes a teacher to become truly wise. And I know that sounds very yoga teacher, but this is not only true of my yoga and meditation teachers, it is supremely true for me about Pema Chodron, Satnarayana, Rupert Spira. But it's also true of Warren Montag and Hannah Cohenfeld, who are my, respectively, my college advisor and my dissertation advisor. These are people who helped teach me not only more than information, but even more than skill. They taught me wisdom. And of course, all my teachers at the Nyingma Institute in Berkeley, where I studied Tibetan Buddhism for quite a while I was in graduate school. I think that, again, like I said, on our own, we can study to become clever. But it takes the experience of wisdom to transmit wisdom. And while I think that I was a very impressive teacher in my 20s, all the more because I was in my 20s and I got so many people saying to me, how did you become such a wise young man? Right? But a lot of it was cleverness. A lot of it was knowledge. A lot of it was information. A lot of it was also knowledge of pedagogy, how to inspire, how to transmit. And yes, that has helped me tremendously. I even used to teach pedagogy to the graduate students at UC Berkeley. The departments hired me to teach them how to teach writing or physics or whatever it was that they were teaching, because there is technique behind pedagogy. But again, I believe, and I'd like to think, I'll try to speak without either false modesty or self-aggradation. I do believe I'm a much more effective teacher today. And it's only the passage of time. It's only years, and it's exposure to people, teachers, with real wisdom to share, and the time to digest and understand it. So is education what is done to you, and learning what you achieve yourself? To some degree, yes, but I think that doesn't exclude the need for transmission and for teachers. How does that sit with you?
I like that. And the reason I say for most of my life, I have kind of, quote, lived by that motto or mantra until I actually dove in, kind of like looked at the definition of education, which in an element is self-learning. And then if we get literal with the definition, then that entire quote or motto begins to unravel itself. So I really like what you said about transmitting the wisdom and needing that to come from someone, and especially in the sense that you, being a yoga therapist and instructor, your goal is to help people along faster. Take all of what you've done, compact it into the most succinct and clear package possible, and then pass that on and pass that wisdom on to the next. Now, an interesting approach to teaching that you have is you believe in teaching people, not poses.
That's exactly, I almost wanted to interrupt you, but I did. and you led right into that. Like I was going to say, yes, and teaching is dialectic. So you described like putting it in a package, and it's true. I've developed systems. I love system thinking. If you give somebody a system, like I think you attended my very, very truncated 8 principle workshop, right? The first one. It's everything you will ever need to know, I claim, about using the body actively, not just in asana, but really any kind of action, in order to keep it safe and effective, and that it's applicable to anyone. right? And that's a huge claim. But despite the fact that I love systems thinking, that you can give somebody something like the 8 principles system, and then I've had students come out of training and say, I was terrified of teaching, but right before and during my very first class, I realized, wait, I have the 8 principles. I can't do this badly. I can't teach badly. And they teach extremely well, right? Despite that, teaching is dialectical. And what I mean by that is it's who's in front of you. It's who's in front of me. I very, very rarely, if ever, have a lesson plan. I have an idea of what it is we're going to do. And I do have a syllabus, partly because Yoga Alliance requires it, and partly because students often want some predictability for a false sense of security in a world where the only constant is change. And hey, I'm not dissing it. I do the same all the time in my life in a different way. And I have compassion for that. So I do provide a syllabus with like, oh, here's the lesson plan. But it always changes depending on who's in front of you. So teaching is a relationship. It's not just in transmission.
It's remaining then authentic to the moment and surrendering to what's happening in front of you, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I think playing music is a fantastic tool or ability to use to educate yourself in a way where you're acting and responding presently. My degree is in theater. I have a minor in psychology, and the theater training and improv training has prepared me more for teaching and for business than anything else in the rest of my life. And it's that ability to then react presently in the moment, given the circumstances surrounding us, but then take that kind of input and allow that to authentically move through your body, and then you have an authentic output.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the things that have really come to me. It's funny that you bring that up, and that you asked earlier what were some of the things I wanted to be as a kid. You just reminded me, not only did I want to be an actor, at some point I remember, no joke, I ran into George Clooney on the street in Tel Aviv. He was there to open a Planet Hollywood in Tel Aviv. And there were like girls screaming, trying to get his attention. And I spoke like a human being to him, and we ended up just standing there and having this long conversation. And he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, actually, I just received a scholarship to go to Los Angeles and study theater. I ended up studying physics, which became literature, which became music, and it's been a long path. Twisty and bendy has been the path that led to yoga teaching. Go figure. But that said, when I was in Hawaii, I got exposed to authentic relating games and circling. And I've brought that deeply into my teacher trainings and all the work that I do now. So even here on Tenerife, my partner and I have been hosting events where we do things like, partake in sacred cacao and do intention setting and play music and sing mantra like I do in my trainings as well, and play authentic relating games and do circling and authentic expression in the moment. So I see exactly that line there that you're pointing out between teaching, yoga, mindfulness, dharma, acting, which really, we think of acting, perhaps some of us think of it as almost like the least authentic thing you can do. But to be great in expression of an acting, a gesture of acting, it's really ecstasy. As the Greeks, the Dionysians saw it. It's about being able to step outside the illusion. Oh, I am shy. I am Kevin. I am a man. I am this many years old. Nonsense. I am everything and everyone. I'm every woman. I'm every child. I'm every blade of grass. I can relate to every experience and then authentically express it. And I have a fun story to tell you about that, but I've been talking a while, so I'll let you pick it up if you want.
I want to hear the story, and it's acting to me was a cathartic release. And the intrigue for acting to me was allowing myself to express emotion after withholding emotion for so long after losing my mother. And like you said, the path to yoga, ironically enough, was windy and bendy as it was for myself. And acting led me to yoga. And acting led me technically to Bali, Indonesia for a quote acting intensive, as well as we were performing. Living in where we were in Bali, they had yoga every single day at 6 a.m., which then allowed me, and I went every single day, and somewhere along like the 2 to 3 week mark, something inside shifted, and I cried for an hour, 2 hours straight, because I was withholding for so long, and it allowed me to finally authentically express who I was and what I wanted to be. Which, yes, if we then tie that back to acting, what I was doing is I was allowing myself to be emotive, but under the guise of being another person or another character or another thing, and then I felt safe.
Yeah.
Without actually allowing myself to be seen, because it was like, oh, if you do a bad job, that's just you doing a bad job playing someone else, not you're doing a bad job as yourself. And that was a huge like wall or barrier to jump over. But once that happened, then it opened up this entire new plane of being that I didn't know was even available to me. It's like you don't know what you don't know at that point. And acting itself was that vessel that allowed me to then, or introduced me then to yoga, which then was kind of like the further peeling back of the onion, so to speak.
Yeah, kind of the next step of realizing you can't do a bad job no matter what.
Exactly. Kind of tangent right there, but I'd love to hear the story that sparked that right there.
Oh well, if it's still relevant, but I guess real quickly, I was doing a study in Greece while I was in college and considering archaeology because I was studying ancient Greek language and really loved it. And I met a Welsh director, Sir Frederick All, and he was putting on a production of Seneca's Trojan Women in a real Roman amphitheater in Kifisia outside of Athens. And I ended up, he encouraged me to audition. I got the lead male role of Ulysses. Now, this is a Roman play, right? It's almost 2,000 years old, but at the same time, the modern chill to it is mind-blowing. Ulysses reads and feels like an SS officer, like that kind of deep, profound. I don't want to use the word evil, but it's hard for me to. How about selfishness? Profound selfishness. And I remember thinking, especially because I spent so much of my childhood struggling with my masculinity, because here I am, a heterosexual male, with a father role model that I wanted to be anything but. I wanted to be everything that I saw him as not. And I've since grown way past that. And I see all the beauty that I've inherited from him and all the beautiful things about him. But at the time, just 20 years old, it was really challenging for me to touch in with a part of myself that I saw as masculine in that really selfish, aggressive way. And Ulysses was the kind that would kill you and step over your body to get past you if he needed to. And I searched and I searched. And let's just say after opening night, I sat with Dr. All and watched the sunset over Kifisia. And he said to me, "You nailed it, my boy. You absolutely nailed it." And I did, and it terrified me when I found Ulysses within me. I found within me the absolutely selfish, aggressive, murderous creature. And I think the world is safer because I found it. You know, I've had one friend say to me that I'm very powerful. And I remember sort of like laughing and saying, "What do you mean by that?" And he said, "You can influence people. You can move them in the direction you want them to move." And I had to admit he was right. And with great power comes great responsibility. And another friend once said to me, "Shy, it's really good that you're on the side of good, because if you weren't, you could do a lot of harm." And the fact is, I acknowledge I have done a lot of harm in my life. Never intentionally, but I have. And I think that finding the most selfish and aggressive part of me that I believe exists in every single one of us, and I mean Gandhi and Mother Teresa and Siddhartha Gautama, it's within every single one of us, the potential for great selfishness, for great confusion. I think that discovering it, being terrified of it, but making contact and then to some degree peace with it, has actually allowed me to be better and kinder to myself and to others. So again, acting has also been a profound part of my healing and development as a person and as a teacher.
I want to shift gears here a little bit to Tantravaya. And the first question I have for you is, what is Tantravaya?
Well, for the longest time, I was giving teacher trainings, and students were asking for what style it was, and I kept saying, well, it's Hatha. Basically, every yoga in the West we do today, if it's not Kundalini, it's Hatha, right? But at some point, it was actually my assistants, right? So I had students that had done my training more than once and were coming back to assist in a training, which is a great way to sort of build up a group of teachers that are better and better in the system that I developed. But some of the students in a current training in Thailand at the time were asking, so what style is this? What are we learning? What do we say that we're teaching? And I said, oh, just say Hatha. And my assistants, who had been already teaching yoga for some years, just kind of called bullshit on me and were like, okay, come on. No, it's not. Like, this is so different. It really is different. And I had to sort of like think about it and said, look, I think it's super presumptuous to say like, oh, I've come up with and named a style of yoga, right? Maybe that's something that they can say about this method when I'm really old or when I've passed. But to me, Tantravaya is not a style, but really a method, really an approach to yoga, which, as the name suggests, Tantravaya literally means weaver of the web, or the weaving of the web. It's a poetic name for a spider, which of course has 8 limbs, like Ashtanga. So it's a fun little wordplay I enjoy. But the weaver of the web of Tantra, of interdependence and interconnectedness. Tantra in the popular world has this association that's very sexual, and for, to some degree, good reasons. But it's also a huge reduction of what Tantra is. Tantra is the fact that, as I'm looking at you right now, Kevin, I'm as much this body and mind as I am this body and mind. And it's the same when I look at a blade of grass. That's the web of interconnectedness and interdependence. So the weaving together of that web is, I think, what we're here for. And so Tantravaya is the weaving together of everything that I've learned in both learning and education, everywhere from academia to my grandmother to my yoga teachers and my meditation teachers. And it's bringing together, as you said in the beginning from my bio, anatomy-based alignment technique, realignment therapy, non-dual philosophy, and really quite a bit more, but in a unified and coherent way.
Having that profound realization of the meaning behind Tantravaya and specifically what that then means to you, how does that affect how you show up in the world?
Less than I would like it to. But that's my perfectionism also, to be fair. I sincerely do try every time that I think that what I need to do is gain as much for myself and avoid loss as much as possible, to have as much pleasure and as little pain as possible for this body and mind, to come off as good as possible. Of course, I'm thinking it right now. I'm like, oh, I wonder if I'm sounding nice to the people who are listening to this. If, of course we all do that. But I try to remember, and over the years and decades, I remember sooner that is not where happiness lies. Happiness does not lie in seeking for self. And I try as sincerely as I can to look at every situation and ask myself, how can I benefit self and other? Because that's also, for a lot of people, self-degrading is a way of negative ego, right? If I am less important than others, if others are more important than me, that's another way to make me special. If I'm the biggest piece of shit on the planet, then I'm really special, right? So it's trying to avoid those extremes, to not pick a side, and to try to hang out in the stream rather than in the banks, to stay in the river, is this approach. True wisdom lies in every moment taking the action, the skillful action that benefits both self and other, to realize that life and reality are absolutely not a zero-sum game where only your loss can lead to my gain. Absolutely the only real gain is the gain to absolutely everyone.
And that's approaching then everything from a mindset of abundance rather than fear-based one.
It is, which, as I said, I probably spend still a majority of hours of the day not there, but I remember more frequently than I used to, and at least that means to me that I'm on the right path.
You have had a very successful career now as a yoga therapist, yoga instructor, running teacher trainings, which I want to talk on and touch on in just a second. Yet, especially given the profession, the yoga profession, there are so many who are struggling to just kind of make ends meet doing what they love or what is their passion. How have you been able to balance here that abundance with then kind of the yogic morals or yogic ethics? And what do you think has set you apart from the rest and allowed you to create such abundance for yourself?
I've thought about this, of course, before, but the fact that you ask that right after or in following of the conversation we've just had, I'm thinking of it differently than I have before. So I'm already feeling like I'm learning in this dialectic with you. I think a lot of it is that sense of we are interdependent, we're interconnected, and as you very brightly pointed out, that naturally cultivates an attitude of abundance. The fact that my first company was taking people on these absolute shoestring, basically zero overhead for me, right? Hey, let's all go to Yosemite National Park together. Everybody who can drive, let us know so we can put people in your car. That kind of attitude. And hey, listen, like I propose a suggested donation of $200 for the event, for the instruction over the weekend. And then 16 people come and I'm like, I can live on this for 2 months, especially back then as a student, right? But the attitude of, look, everybody is welcome. And the point is not gain. The point is all boats rise. The point is the great equanimity, that which benefits self and other. I think that has really been a guiding principle for me. I've come to realize that the education that I provide is of an extremely high level. And again, I try to speak without self-aggrandizing, but also without false modesty. I think what I have to offer, and as a result of devoting my life for so many years to these studies, is of exceptional value. And as such, I believe it is right for it to be valued. I don't believe in charging what some teacher trainings charge. There's these programs that are $10,000 and $15,000 and so on, and power to them. But I do believe in valuing programs well. And for example, with COVID, we've had this onslaught of online teacher trainings for a few $100s. And I've stayed well shy of that and asked, of course, less than when I have an overhead cost of hosting people and providing residence and food, but still a fair and reasonable trade for the education. And it has made me very well off financially. However, relatively to my parents and where I grew up and and all of that, and also in my own eyes. In my own eyes, I feel very, very well off the fact that I can buy a large piece of land now for this project we talked about briefly. But at the same time, my attitude has always been, with the hope that nobody unfairly takes advantage of it, is if you want to be there and you want to learn, come learn. And the people who are abundant, if you are not, we'll cover for that. So I've had people take my program and pay nothing. And some of them never paid it back, but I honestly believe they paid it forward. I have had people who I never expected, and then I get like a PayPal sometimes a couple of years later, and I'm like, what is this for? Right? Because so I think it's that attitude of abundance, of we all have enough, of everybody is welcome, and of if there's space in the space, what do I gain by you not being there if you can't pay for it? While at the same time, a lot of teachers have a hard time valuing what they give. And it's like, oh, but it's yoga, I should give it for free. And it's like, it's your work. It's your vocation. It's your livelihood. Value it appropriately. And that's also appropriately to your level of experience, and don't pretend. Appropriately to your level of knowledge and skill, and don't pretend. And I've come to acknowledge mine is as high as the years that have passed and the devotion I've given to it. I want it to be for everybody, not only the wealthiest. And with that attitude of abundance, the wealthier pay for those who have less means, and it works out.
I want to add one point to that right there, and the level of value that someone or a student would get out of a program is actually, in essence, for most, directly tied to the price that they pay and the exchange that they give for that training. Therefore, with that understanding, devaluing it in your own mind actually then, monetarily speaking, then also devalues it in the mind of the student. And while the trainings might not change, the value that they're going to receive is dramatically different.
I agree. And again, coming back to this question of charging for this kind of education, I firmly believe, I think it was Sachidananda who said this. He said, make money. Make lots of money. Make more money than you need, so that at least you don't have to worry about that. But, and of course, I'm very, very, very roughly paraphrasing, but he said, make it providing a sincere service to your fellow beings. Make wealth by finding a sincere need and filling it. And then you can use that wealth to meet other needs. So I feel excellent about the fact that people have said to many people have said to me after training, now that I've taken it, I would have paid 5 times as much. It's worth 5 times as much. And yet the wealth that it has provided me now allows me to do something that I feel is just as urgent as teaching, which is reforestation, soil regeneration, environmental projects, and so on.
So you have a 200 and a 500 hour coming up starting in September 2021. Yeah. What or where is the best place for someone to learn more about that and inquire?
Well, of course, the website, Tantravaya and there you've got all the information about what we learn in the program. So it's a 200 followed by a 300, so you can do your entire 500-hour online. And I'm really, really stoked. Last year, 2020, I was supposed to do an in-person training in Canada that was, of course, canceled due to COVID. And I thought, you know what, let's do one online so that people who wanted to take it, maybe some of them will want to do it. To my own shock and surprise, almost 70 people did that program. And in 2 ways, it was the most successful program ever. One, very practically, in that the final classes that everybody had to teach to everybody else were honestly the best we've ever seen. And in retrospect, I understand why. I've had some students say to me that learning from me is like drinking from the fire hose. It's as you've put it, the older I get, the better I am at refining it into very digestible systems. But there's still a lot of knowledge in 200 hours, especially in like a 3 or 4 week retreat. Maybe you can digest 10, 20% of that. But when we can take longer, so this program is going to be a couple of hours a day and everything recorded. And I've had people tell me, your 2-hour session from today, I spent 5 hours studying it, right? The degree of absorption and retention that can be achieved in that kind of program is fantastic. And then in addition to that, 70 people from all over the world, like literally from New Zealand to Colombia and everything in between, that many of us had never even met in person, It blows my mind to think that we've never met in person. These are my brothers and sisters. The kind of intimacy and love that you experience, that I've experienced in every teacher training in person, we experience just as much as little boxes on the screen like you and I are right now, which is, it's just a testament to the beauty and power of these teachings. So I am super excited to do now an even slower, longer, like if you do the entire 500 hours, it's over the course of 9 months. I believe that really facilitates the capacity to do higher education in yoga with a capital Y, higher education in mind, body, arts. And so yeah, tantravayayoga.com is where you can read about all the things we're going to be doing in there.
I will link to that in the show notes, and I 100% stand by the length of that as well, allowing, and this is one of the elements that was an education for me when I did my 200-hour, and I had the option to choose between, I believe it was 1 month or 6 months, and I chose the 6-month option for that exact reason, and that's one of the best decisions that I've ever made, because it allowed it to not only integrate, but kind of seep in and sink in even deeper than I feel like it would have if you're just trying to churn out students one after the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my best advice for those of us who are, again, privileged enough to do so, do both. Do a long training that gives you time to absorb and retain, and if possible, one where everything is recorded, whether if it's online or in person, so that you can go back and review and study like we're going to do, and like we did last year in this program. But I also want to underscore the value of a retreat training because it's also life-changing. You may not retain as much, but the personal transformation that occurs when a group of us get together and study is also mind-blowing. So hopefully we are moving forward, not back, into a more sustainable one, and yet one in which you and a lot of our friends and loved ones can come meet me here on Tenerife and the Canary Islands, when on our own land, fed by the produce we produce, we can also do an immersion training or a course. May it be soon.
It will be, and I would absolutely love that. Shy, I want to say thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate your time today. I have a couple rapid fire questions, if you don't mind, to finish up this episode. And,
I don't mind.
And potentially bookend it, because I feel like we have a lot more that we could discuss at a later date. The first question being, in terms of your own personal development, who or what has had the biggest impact on you?
Pema Chodron. Pema Chodron, who is, to those of you who don't know, American Buddhist nun who became the first, I believe, in her tradition, ordained, and now runs her own center for predominantly Western people of the Buddhist cloth. Her teaching over the years continues to deepen my connection with my heart, my compassion, my modesty and humility, for which I still have a lot of work to do.
If you could have a conversation with someone alive or not, who would it be and why?
Absolutely, Siddhartha Gautama, so the historical Buddha, simply because it is said that after his enlightenment, the Buddha actually never spoke another word. He just chanted, ah, and everyone that he met heard exactly the teaching that they need to hear. It's a beautiful tale that underscores how teaching is a dialectic. It's not just a passage of information. It's what you have to give and I have to receive. So, wow, if I could stand across from Siddhartha Gautama and hear him chant to me and get exactly what I need, I would give a lot for that.
If you could tell your 10-year-old self one thing, what would it be?
Just wait. It's going to get so much better. Life is going to be so good. And I'd like to say that actually to every child and teenager and 20-something and 30-something and really all people out there, it really can get better. It sometimes in the deepest depths of despair, like it was for me when I was 10 years old, it seems like it never will. It always can. I am absolutely convinced of that.
Last but not least, Shy, in your opinion, what is the single most important thing someone can do to live a happy, healthy, and fulfilling life?
Meditate. But it's important for me to underscore what I mean by that, because most people have this crazy idea that meditating is stopping thoughts, which is nonsense. Meditating is being your best friend. And your best friend, no matter what you're going through, just supports you and accepts you. So it's sitting there, and if there are thoughts, supporting and accepting yourself through thinking. And if there's physical pain, supporting and accepting yourself through physical pain. And there's no way to do it wrong. If you are conscious of what's going on, whether it's thinking or whatever madness or pain or discomfort arises, if you're aware of it, you do your best to accept it, and you support yourself through it instead of turning away, running away, lying to yourself. I think that's the practice of happiness.
I love that. I love the reframe there as well. Shy, thank you very much for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure to get to catch up and dive a little bit deeper into your story.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it as well.
Thank you. My pleasure is completely mine. I want to open the floor if there's anything else you'd like to say or add. The floor is yours.
I honestly can't think of anything. This feels complete.
I love it. Well, Shy, thank you so much. Have an amazing rest of your day.
You as well, Kevin. Hope to see you soon again.
Hey, it's Kevin here, and before I let you go, I wanted to let you know that the complete show notes for this episode, as well as any other, can be found at kevinwathey.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a short review on Apple Podcasts. I love reading the reviews, and they're often the tipping point in helping us book some very hard-to-reach guests. Now, if you want to or would like to receive a weekly email from me called the Weekly Mindful Memo, head over to kevinwathey.com/VIP to subscribe. By signing up, you'll receive exclusive behind-the-scenes access and be the first to know about upcoming episodes, retreats, and more direct to your inbox. Again, you can sign up to receive the Weekly Mindful Memo by going to kevinwathey.com/VIP. Thank you for listening. Much love, and have a wonderful rest of your day.